Okay, so you want to own a shopping mall. A massive climate-controlled building with 100 stores under one roof, thousands of shoppers walking past glass storefronts every single day, and every one of those stores paying you rent just for the privilege of standing there. You picture the parking lot full on a Saturday afternoon, the food court packed with families spending $14 on a slice of pizza and a fountain drink that cost you pennies to serve. You see the kiosks in the middle of the walkway, the ones selling phone cases and sunglasses from a cart the size of a dining table, and each one writing you a rent check every month for a patch of tile smaller than a parking space. You hear the hum of escalators, the echo of footsteps on polished floors, the ambient noise of money moving in every direction at once. Someone just paid $9 for a smoothie at the food court that contains roughly 60 cents of frozen fruit and a splash of apple juice from concentrate. The markup on that cup is higher than most people's savings. Great, and you're not wrong. A well-run mall can generate tens of millions of dollars in annual rental income, with profit margins that would make most retailers jealous. Here's what that dream actually costs. If the shopping mall model is so profitable, why have roughly 30% of enclosed malls in America either closed or been slated for demolition or repurposing since the year 2000? Why did Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio, go from 98% occupied with over 140 stores to a pile of rubble and an Amazon warehouse in less than 2 decades? Why did Sears, once the largest retailer in the country, file for bankruptcy in October of 2018 and drag dozens of mall owners into financial distress overnight? And the gap between what a shopping mall looks like on the outside and what it actually costs to keep one running is enormous. Let's start at the beginning. Before you can build anything, you need somewhere to build it. And where you build a shopping mall is not just one of the decisions you make, it is the decision. A mall's profitability is almost entirely a function of the population density, household income, and traffic patterns within a 10 to 15-mile radius of its front door. Get the location right, and you have a 40-year income machine. Get it wrong, and you have a very expensive empty building. Land for a regional mall needs to be flat, accessible from at least one major highway or arterial road, and zoned for commercial use at the scale you're building. In a suburban market, near a growing metro area, raw land for a site this size can cost somewhere between $5 million and $30 million, depending on the region. In a premium coastal or urban-adjacent market, that number can climb past $50 million before you've touched a shovel. A regional mall typically requires somewhere between 40 and 100 acres when you factor in the building footprint, the surface parking, and the required setbacks and drainage infrastructure. Then come the pre-development costs that most people never think about: environmental impact studies, geotechnical soil testing, traffic impact analyses, stormwater management plans, and the small mountain of zoning hearings, variance applications, and municipal permits required before you're allowed to break ground. Those studies and approvals alone can run $500,000 to $2 million and take 12 to 24 months, and none of that includes the cost of negotiating with the municipality for infrastructure improvements, new traffic signals, turn lanes, or road widening that the local government may require as a condition of granting your building permit. In some jurisdictions, the developer pays for those improvements entirely out of pocket, which can add another $2 million to $8 million to the pre-construction bill. There's also the question of utility infrastructure. If the site isn't already served by water mains, sewer lines, and electrical capacity sufficient for a 1 million square foot commercial building, you're paying to extend those services to the property, and you haven't built a single thing yet, and you've already spent a fortune. Let's walk through where the rest of that money goes. Start building a regional shopping mall from scratch in the United States, the kind with 2 or 3 anchor department stores, 80 to 120 inline stores, a food court, and structured parking. Costs roughly $400 to $600 per square foot for core and shell construction. A mall with 1 million square feet of gross leasable area, which is a standard size for a regional center, puts your construction budget somewhere between $150 million and $250 million depending on the market, the design complexity, and the number of levels. That number covers the structural steel, the concrete, the roofing systems, the exterior facades, and the basic building envelope. It does not cover tenant buildouts, tenant improvement allowances, the money the mall owner contributes to help stores finish their interior spaces, typically run $30 to $80 per square foot, and can add another $20 million to $40 million across a full mall. Mechanical systems alone eat a massive portion of the budget. Havasi for a 1,000,000 square foot enclosed building requires industrial-scale rooftop units or central chiller plants, miles of ductwork, and sophisticated building automation systems from manufacturers like Trane, Carrier, or Johnson Controls. That climate control package can run $25 million to $45 million by itself. Electrical systems, including main switchgear, distribution panels, emergency generators, and the wiring to service 100 individual tenant meters, can cost $15 million to $25 million. Fire suppression, including wet sprinkler systems across every floor, fire alarm panels, smoke evacuation systems, and code-required standpipe connections, runs $8 million to $15 million. Structured parking, if your site requires a multi-level garage instead of surface lots, costs roughly $20,000 to $35,000 per parking space, and a mall of this size might need 3,000 to 5,000 spaces. That is not a typo. A parking structure alone can cost $60 million to $175 million. Then add landscaping, signage, site lighting, elevators and escalators, restrooms, management offices, security infrastructure, and the technology systems for Wi-Fi, digital directories, and building management software. Cost overruns are the norm, not the exception. Across commercial real estate developments of this scale, overruns average 15 to 25% above the original budget. When you add it all up, a ground-up regional mall can cost somewhere between $200 million and $400 million to deliver. Most of that money is borrowed. A typical financing structure involves 30 to 40% equity from the developer and 60 to 70% in construction debt, often from a syndicate of lenders. That debt begins accruing interest the day the first draw is funded, months or years before the first tenant opens for business. Now, here is the part of this business that shoppers never see. Guests see polished tile floors, bright storefronts, and the quiet hum of background music. Owners see a mechanical city buried behind the walls and above the ceiling tiles, the HVAC system in a 1,000,000 square foot. Mall doesn't just cool the air, it manages airflow pressure across dozens of separate zones, balances the heat output of thousands of light fixtures and cooking exhaust hoods, and maintains a temperature differential between the interior and exterior that can swing by 60 degrees depending on the season. The plumbing system services not just public restrooms but every restaurant, every food court vendor, every salon, and every dental office or medical clinic that's been added as malls have diversified their tenant mix. The electrical system is delivering power to 100 separate businesses, each with its own demand profile. From a jewelry store running spotlights on diamonds to a gym running 40 treadmills at peak hour. Beneath the parking lot, there are stormwater detention systems designed to manage the runoff from 20 to 40 acres of impervious surface. Inside the walls, there are fire-rated chaseways carrying communication cables, sprinkler risers, and ventilation shafts that must remain accessible for inspection at all times. The roof alone, spanning tens of thousands of square feet, often a combination of flat membrane sections and skylighted atriums, is one of the most maintenance-intensive surfaces in all of commercial real estate. On any given day, the loading dock at the back of the building is receiving deliveries for dozens of separate businesses, each on its own schedule, each with its own security requirements and waste disposal needs. The mall's central waste management system handles tons of garbage and recyclable material per week, all of which must be sorted, compacted, and hauled away on a regular contract that can cost $150,000 to $300,000 per year. And then there are the pest control programs running continuously behind the scenes, because a building with a food court, dozens of restaurants, and miles of hidden pipe chases is an invitation to every species of rodent and insect in the county. This invisible infrastructure is the most expensive machine you own, and most of your guests will never know it exists. Now let's talk about what it costs to keep this machine running every single month. Utilities on a building of this size are enormous: electricity, for a 1 million-square-foot enclosed mall can run 1.5 million to 3 million per year, depending on the climate, the age of the lighting and HVAC systems, and local utility rates. That electricity is running climate control 365 days a year, powering common area lighting from opening to well past closing, and feeding elevators, escalators, security cameras, and fire safety systems around the clock. Water and sewer for a mall with a food court, public restrooms, and landscaping irrigation can add another $200,000 to $500,000 annually. Natural gas. If the building uses gas-fired heating, or if food court tenants operate gas cooking equipment, adds another $150,000 to $400,000. Then there are the supplies and services that keep the building looking like somewhere. People want to spend an afternoon janitorial. Contracts for daily cleaning, floor maintenance, and restroom service typically run $400,000 to $800,000 per year. Landscaping and snow removal, depending on the region, can cost $150,000 to $350,000. Elevator and escalator maintenance contracts, typically serviced by companies like Otis, Schindler, or ThyssenKrupp, run $100,000 to $250,000 annually for a multi-level mall. Now, here's the number that catches most people off guard. Property tax on a large commercial retail property in a major metro area can exceed $10 per square foot per year. On a 1 million-square-foot mall, that's a property tax bill of $3 million to $10 million per year, depending on the assessed value and the local tax rate. If property tax is expensive, insurance is catastrophic. Commercial property insurance for a building of this size and complexity, covering fire, wind, flood, general liability and business interruption, can run $1.5 million to $4 million per year, and premiums have been climbing sharply across the commercial real estate industry since 2020, with some owners reporting increases of 20 to 40% in a single renewal cycle. Insurance and taxes together account for roughly 45% of total mall operating costs, according to data from the Institute of Real Estate Management. That percentage stays essentially fixed regardless of how many stores are open. The single largest line item in a shopping mall's operating budget is not utilities. It is not insurance, it is people. A large regional mall typically employs somewhere between 40 and 80 people directly on the property management side, not counting the employees of the stores themselves. That staff includes a general manager, an assistant manager, a marketing director, a team of leasing agents, a maintenance crew of 8 to 15 people handling everything from HVAC filter changes to parking lot pothole repairs, a security team of 10 to 20 officers covering shifts from opening through overnight patrol, a janitorial supervisor overseeing contract cleaning staff, and an administrative team handling accounting, tenant billing, and CAM reconciliations. The general manager of a classy. A regional mall earns somewhere between $120,000 and $200,000 per year. A seasoned leasing director can earn $90,000 to $150,000, plus commission on signed leases. Security officers, who are often the most visible staff in the building and the first to respond to medical emergencies, shoplifting incidents and crowd control situations, typically earn $15 to $22 per hour, but the 24/7 coverage required means the total annual security budget can run $500,000 to $1.2 million. Maintenance technicians with HVAC certification, electrical licensing, or plumbing credentials earn $25 to $40 per hour, and the mall needs them on call at all times. Turnover in property management roles, particularly security and maintenance, runs between 30 and 50% annually in the commercial real estate industry. Every departure costs money in recruiting, training, and lost institutional knowledge about the building's specific quirks and systems. Total payroll for mall property management staff, including benefits, workers' compensation insurance, and payroll taxes, typically runs $3 million to $6 million per year. Payroll in the shopping mall industry typically accounts for 30 to 40% of total operating expenses. Safety is not a line item. Safety is the business a shopping mall is a public assembly space which means it is subject to fire codes, building codes, AD accessibility requirements, health department inspections for food service areas, and local occupancy regulations that dictate everything from the width of emergency exits to the placement of fire extinguishers. The International Building Code, enforced through local jurisdictions, requires regular inspection of structural elements, fire suppression systems, emergency lighting, and egress routes. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires accessible entrances, restrooms, elevators, and parking, and a single complaint can trigger a federal investigation and costly remediation. In June of 2012, the Algo Centre Mall in Elliott Lake, Ontario suffered a catastrophic roof collapse when its rooftop parking deck caved. On a Saturday afternoon, 2 women were killed and more than 20 people were injured. The subsequent public inquiry found that the building's roof had been leaking for decades, that corrosion had been slowly eating away at the steel support structure, and that despite more than 30 engineering inspections over the mall's 33-year life, no one had taken adequate action to address the deterioration. The inquiry commissioner described it as a failure of apathy, neglect, and indifference. At every level, the mall was demolished. The engineer who signed off on the building's condition just weeks before the collapse faced criminal charges, insurance. Premiums for aging mall properties across North America rose sharply in the years. Following the incident, safety is not a cost to be minimized. It is the condition under which the entire business is permitted to exist. Now, before we get into how the money actually comes in, if you've been keeping a mental tab, we are now several million into annual operating costs before we have collected a single dollar of rent. If you're finding this breakdown useful, hit the subscribe button and give the video a like. It genuinely helps bring more of this content your way. Let's talk about how the revenue actually works. The primary income stream for a mall owner is base rent, a fixed monthly payment from each tenant, priced per square foot per year. In a strong Class A mall, inline stores, the smaller specialty shops that line the corridors, typically pay somewhere between $40 and $65 per square foot per year in base rent. Anchor tenants, the large department stores that sit at the ends of the building, pay dramatically less. Before its bankruptcy, Sears was paying roughly $4 to $5 per square foot in many of its mall locations, while the average rent for non-anchor tenants in the same buildings was closer to $50 or $60. That's not a mistake. The people who understand this business do not think of anchor rent as profit. They think of it as the cost coverage mechanism. The anchor pays below market rent because its name, its brand, and its foot traffic are what make every other lease in the building possible. The anchor doesn't sell the mall merchandise, the anchor sells the mall. Customers' profit is built on what those customers spend as they walk past every other store on their way in and out. The second revenue stream is percentage, rent on top of base rent. Many mall leases include a clause that gives the mall owner a cut of the tenant's sales above a predetermined threshold called the breakpoint. A typical structure might set the breakpoint at $500 per square foot in annual sales, with the mall owner taking 5 to 7% of everything above that line. A store occupying 2,000 square feet with a breakpoint at $500 per square foot has an annual sales threshold of $1 million. If that store sells $1.4 million in a given year, the mall owner collects 6% of the $400,000 above the breakpoint, which is $24,000 in additional rent that year. That money scales automatically with how well the mall performs, without the owner renegotiating a single lease. The third revenue stream is common area maintenance, or CAM. This is not technically rent. It's a reimbursement. Each tenant pays a proportional share of the cost of operating the building itself. Cleaning, lighting, security, landscaping, elevator maintenance, parking lot upkeep, all of it. If the mall's total CAM costs for the year are $6 million and a tenant occupies 2% of the total leasable space, that tenant owes $120,000 toward those shared expenses. This means a significant portion of the mall's operating costs are passed directly through to the tenants. But here's the detail buried inside the CAM structure that catches owners off guard. Those shared costs don't shrink just because part of the mall sits empty. The hallways still need to be cleaned, whether every store beside them is occupied or not. The lights above a vacant storefront still draw. Power security still patrols the entire building, not just the leased sections. So when vacancy rises, the same fixed pool of shared expenses gets divided among fewer paying tenants, which means each remaining tenant's CAM bill quietly goes up. Rising vacancy doesn't just mean lost rent from the empty stores. It raises the cost of staying in business for every store that's still open, which is exactly the kind of pressure that pushes marginal tenants to leave too. Then there's a fourth category that most people never think about: kiosks. Those small carts and islands in the middle of walkways can generate $200 to $400 per square foot in rent because they sit directly in the path of maximum foot traffic. Kiosk occupying 80 square feet might pay $25,000 to $35,000 per year, which on a per square foot basis makes it one of the most profitable pieces of real estate in the entire building. Digital advertising on directory screens and wall-mounted displays can generate $200,000 to $500,000 per year in a high-traffic mall. Pop-up shops, seasonal booths, holiday photo installations, and event rentals add another $100,000 to $400,000 annually. Parking fees, where applicable in dense urban centers, can generate $500,000 to $2 million per year. A Class A mall with 800,000 square feet of leasable space, 95% occupied, with an average blended rent of $45 per square foot, generates roughly $34 million in base rental income alone. Add percentage rent, CAM recoveries and ancillary income, and gross revenue for a well-performing regional mall can reach $40 million to $55 million per year. Now, here is where the math gets uncomfortable. Take that $45 million in annual gross revenue, subtract $6 million in property. Taxes, subtract $3 million insurance, subtract $4 million in payroll, subtract $3 million in utilities, subtract $2 million in maintenance and repairs, subtract $1.5 million in cleaning, landscaping and contracted services, subtract $1 million in management and administrative overhead, subtract $500,000 in marketing and tenant retention programs. That's roughly $21 million in annual operating expenses. Your net operating income is somewhere between $20 million and $24 million, but you're not done. If you financed $150 million in construction or acquisition debt at 6%, interest on a 25-year amortization, your annual debt service is roughly $11.5 million after debt service. Your pre-tax cash flow is somewhere between $8.5 million and $12.5 million on a $200 million total investment. That's a cash-on-cash return of roughly 4 to 6%. When you add it all up, a shopping mall with $45 million in annual gross revenue might net somewhere between $8 million and $12 million in a good year, a profit margin of roughly 18 to 27%, if everything goes right, and everything has to go right. Here is the one thing the owner cannot control: the anchors, everything. In a shopping mall's financial structure is quietly connected to the anchor. Tenants staying open. When Sears filed for bankruptcy in October of 2018, it had stores in roughly 59 properties owned by one major mall, REIT, alone. Across the industry, roughly 80% of Sears-branded stores were located inside regional malls. Each closure didn't just remove one tenant's rent check, it triggered co-tenancy clauses, contract provisions buried in nearly every mall lease that allow smaller tenants to reduce their rent or walk away entirely if a named anchor store closes. One anchor closure can trigger a cascade of rent reductions across dozens of inline tenants simultaneously, all because of legal language written years earlier, when everyone assumed the anchor would stay forever. And filling that empty anchor space is neither simple nor fast. These buildings were designed for one specific kind of tenant: enormous floor plates sometimes exceeding 100,000 square feet, with loading docks and column spacing that don't easily convert into anything else. One mall owner reportedly spent $100 million over 3 years just to subdivide a single former department store into 4 smaller retail spaces. Fixed costs do not drop at all. The HVAC still runs, the debt payment is still due. The property tax bill doesn't shrink because a wing of your mall sits dark. This is the structural trap at the center of shopping mall economics. The costs are fixed, the revenue is dependent on anchors, and the anchors are controlled by forces that do not show up on any financial model you build on the day you buy the property. There's a deeper layer beneath even, that the anchors themselves are being hollowed out by online shopping. Most of the 20th century, a mall's core product was convenience, the ability to compare 5 brands of shoes in one afternoon under one roof. That convenience was the entire reason people would drive across town and pay for parking. Online retail broke that monopoly completely. A shopper can now compare hundreds of options from a couch, have the order delivered in a day or two, and never deal with parking, walking, or a checkout line. The mall's original reason for existing simply stopped being unique to malls. This is why the malls that struggled most were the ones stuck in the middle, not upscale enough to sell an experience people can't get online, but not cheap enough to compete purely on price with discount retailers and warehouse clubs. Between 2010 and 2023, e-commerce's share of total U.S. retail sales climbed from roughly 6% to over 15%, and every percentage point of that shift removed a customer who used to walk through a mall corridor. Past a dozen storefronts, the strong malls got stronger, the weak malls got weaker, and the gap between them kept widening. Here is how the winners solved this problem. Simon Property Group, the largest mall REIT in the United States, owns or has interests in more than 250 retail properties and generated $4.8 billion in real estate funds from operations in 2025 alone. With occupancy above 96%, the company didn't achieve those numbers by holding on to the old model. They achieved them by relentlessly upgrading their portfolio toward Class A properties, selling off weaker assets before they became liabilities, and transforming what their malls actually sell. Instead of filling empty anchor boxes with another department store, the surviving operators have been converting that space into gyms, medical clinics, co-working offices, entertainment venues, and in some cases, residential apartments. Brookfield Properties took entire wings of underperforming malls and redeveloped them into mixed-use projects that combine retail with housing, hotels, and office space, creating multiple independent income streams within a single property. The logic is straightforward, even if the execution is expensive and slow. A mall used to sell convenience, the ability to compare 5 brands of shoes in one afternoon. Online shopping eliminated that advantage completely. The malls that survived started selling things a screen cannot deliver: a restaurant meal with friends, a workout, a doctor's appointment, a place to live. The American Dream Megamall in New Jersey, despite its troubled development history, was designed from the start around this principle, dedicating more than half its square footage to entertainment, dining, and attractions rather than traditional retail. The idea is that a family visiting an indoor water park, an ice rink, or a theme park will spend 3 to 5 hours on site instead of 45 minutes, and every additional hour inside the building is another hour of potential spending at adjacent restaurants, shops, and food vendors. Per-visit spending at entertainment-anchored malls can be 2 to 3 times higher than at traditional retail-only centers. This is why mixed-use, experiential mall operators have built sustainable, scalable businesses, while many standalone traditional malls continue to struggle. Let's put 2 scenarios side by side. Scenario 1. You acquire a well-located class. A mall for $200 million occupancy. Hold steady at 95%. Your anchor tenants are creditworthy, national brands with long-term leases, inline. Stores are paying an average of $50 per square foot. Percentage rent kicks in across a third of your tenant base. Gross revenue comes in at $48 a million. Operating expenses total $20 million. Net operating income is $28 million after $11.5 million in debt service. Your annual cash flow is $16.5 million. Your cash-on-cash return on $70 million in equity is roughly 23%. Your payback period is somewhere between 4 and 5 years. Scenario 2. Same mall, same investment, but your largest anchor. A department store occupying 120,000 square feet. announces its closing. Co-tenancy clauses activate across 18 inline tenants. 12. Give them exercise their right to pay reduced rent. 6. Of them vacate entirely when their leases expire that year. Your occupancy drops to 78%. Your gross revenue falls to $31 million. Your operating expenses barely move. They drop to $18.5 million because the building is still the same physical size and still needs to be secured, insured, heated, cooled, and maintained. Net operating income is $12.5 million after debt service. Your cash flow is $1 million. Your return on equity is 1.4%. And if you can't fill that anchor box within 18 months, next year could be worse. The remaining tenants see rising CAM charges and falling foot traffic, and the ones with upcoming lease expirations start shopping for space at a competing center across town. Vacancy feeds. Vacancy. This is not a hypothetical. It is a documented pattern. It is exactly what happened to Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio, which went from 98% occupied in the mid-1990s to completely empty by 2013 and was demolished by 2019. The building didn't change, the economics underneath it did. The difference between Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 is not incompetence. It is one phone call from a department store's corporate office. The gap between those two outcomes is $15.5 million in annual cash flow. That gap is the business that the shopping mall industry in the United States encompasses. Roughly 1,150 enclosed malls with a combined gross leasable area of 1.8 billion square feet. Shopping centers collectively generate over $612 billion in annual retail sales and support more than 4.2 million direct jobs. The industry contributes roughly $650 billion to U.S. GDP annually. Most people who own malls today don't own them the way you'd own a house. They own them through a real estate investment trust, or REIT, a company that holds income-producing property and is legally required to distribute roughly 90% of its taxable income to shareholders in exchange for not paying corporate income tax on that money. This structure is a huge part of why large-scale mall ownership exists in its current form. Ordinary investors can buy shares in a mall-owning REIT on the stock market without ever having to personally deal with a leaking roof or a collapsed anchor tenant. The largest of these companies own dozens, sometimes over 100 shopping centers at once, spreading the risk of any single mall failing across a much bigger portfolio. That's a very different game than the one facing a private buyer who puts everything into one building in one town. What it takes to survive in this business is not passion for retail or a good eye for real estate. It takes a financial structure built to absorb shocks, an insurance program designed for worst-case scenarios, and capital reserves deep enough to carry the property through 18 to 36 months of anchor vacancy without missing a debt payment. The malls that win, the ones that grow, expand, and get acquired at premium valuations, understood from the beginning that this is not a building full of stores. It is a single interconnected financial system where every tenant's survival is quietly tied to every other tenant's survival, and where one departure can rearrange the economics of the entire structure overnight. What owners actually manage day to day is not glamorous. It is roof leaks, HVAC zone complaints, CAM reconciliation disputes, anchor tenant negotiations, co-tenancy clause exposure modeling, property tax appeals, insurance renewal negotiations, parking lot resurfacing schedules, escalator maintenance windows, food court health inspections, and the constant, grinding work of keeping 100 separate businesses happy enough to renew their leases when the term expires. Before you go, if you want to go deeper on the financial mechanics behind businesses like this, there's a detailed business guide linked in the description and pinned. In the first comment, it covers the frameworks behind how you actually read and stress test a business model. Worth bookmarking. A. Alfred Taubman, the Michigan developer most credited with designing the modern American shopping mall, once described his entire philosophy as eliminating what he called threshold resistance, the physical and psychological barriers standing between a shopper and a purchase. He spaced anchor stores 3 city blocks apart, so shoppers would walk past dozens of smaller shops to get from one end to the other. He placed escalators at the ends of hallways instead of the middle, so people would travel the full length of every corridor. He mixed artificial lighting with skylights so shoppers would lose track of time. None of it was decoration. Every choice was designed to maximize the amount of storefront a pair of eyes would pass across before reaching what they actually came for. That's the entire commercial logic of a shopping mall in one sentence. Force movement, and you increase exposure. And exposure is what every smaller tenant is paying for when they sign a lease. The building isn't really the business, the people walking through it are. The question is not whether shopping malls make money. Some of them make a great deal of it. The question is whether the person running one really understood what they were buying. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing.